Live from Los Angeles at Sinai Temple, this is Rabbi Sherman and Rabbi on the Sidelines. This morning we are joined by ESPN Bracketologist Joe Lunardi from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, author of new book Bracketology, forward by Mark Few from Gonzaga, about the obsession of bracketology in the basketball world, the sports world, and beyond. Joe, it's so great to have you. Thanks for joining us this morning.
This is a first for me, Rabbi. I have to say I'm honored.
That's what most people have said about this podcast. Sports and faith. Do they intersect?
I mean, in fairness, I never made Rabbi on the Sidelines before.
Well, I haven't been on Bracketology, but a lot of your colleagues have been on this show the last couple of months with Greenberg and Schulman and Katz, and everybody's guessing. And first of all, you did a great job with this March Madness tournament. Tell us what it was like having March Madness back in the sports world, what it meant for sports, but also what it meant for the American public at large.
Yeah, I mean, I am not anyone to minimize the pandemic by any stretch. Mm-hmm. And I don't think that, the fact that we didn't have a tournament in 2020, I mean, nobody died because of that. Mm-hmm. Okay. It doesn't mean we weren't within our rights to be disappointed if you're somebody that loves college basketball. I mean, that's a reasonable feeling. By the same token, having it back, didn't bring back any of those who we tragically lost in the last year and change. So mm-hmm. I'm not suggesting that, in the grand scheme of things, basketball is like all that big of a deal. Mm-hmm. Having said that, just like we were within our rights to be sad, I think we were within our rights to be, delighted by its return. It's human nature, right? To grasp the things that you enjoy. And taking it a step further, if it, was 1% of a signal or a symbol that, we as a people were in a way coming out the other side of all this, then I'm happy to have been a part of it. Because, I think a lot of people probably have earned the right to feel good about something. And this, I know, made a lot of people feel good, myself included. So,
I'm in that camp.
Yeah, hopefully next year we can welcome back some fans. And I think, again, it's just a matter of keeping it in perspective.
Absolutely. I was watching TNT with Katz and Barkley and Ernie Johnson, and when VCU got taken out of the tournament for the positive COVID test, he said something important, actually referenced his son who is disabled. And he said, look, it's a basketball game. But at the same time, for so many people, I grew up in Syracuse. We'll talk about the Orange, and your thanks for letting us in this year. We made a nice little run with Buddy Buckets.
My pleasure.
It's more than a game. It's more than a game. So I like to put different buckets. I have my sacred and my ordinary. So let's start with the ordinary. Down the street here in Los Angeles, Sinai Temple from Pauley Pavilion. Lots of Bruins fans at this congregation. Also lots of Trojan fans. The Bruins, the last four in, makes that run to the Final Four. Did you see that coming? And what would have happened if they weren't in? Who would have made that run instead?
Well, the great thing about college basketball, and in particular the NCAA tournament, is we never know, do we? And here's the way I like to kind of explain it to people. And for whatever reason, I've done a number of corporate, Zoom events this March Madness and spring season. And they seem to largely be tech companies and data people and cloud storage people. And they understand, metrics and data and analytics. So here's what I would say to you. We don't know about a UCLA because in the bigger scheme of sports, a single elimination college basketball game is an extremely small sample size.
Mm-hmm.
Right? We're talking a 40-minute game with a 30-second shot clock played by overgrown teenagers in which there is an average of 70 possessions in a game. And that might sound like a lot, except, now we're kind of trending, for those of us who need to get our basketball fix, we're trending in the NBA direction, and we're heading toward the NBA playoffs, where historically the teams we think are the best almost always make it to the end.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like the number of years that Jordan or LeBron or Larry or Michael or Dr. J or whomever weren't in the finals is, a minority of the time. And I would argue that it's because in a 7-game NBA series, that of 48-minute games with a 24-second shot clock, we're talking about 700 possessions instead of 70. So in any endeavor, whether we're talking batting averages, stock quotes, real estate prices, or, the number of hairs on a human head, if you have 10 times the sample size in one endeavor versus another, you're more likely to get a true outcome the larger the sample. And college basketball is the ultimate small sample size event. In a lot of cases, you wouldn't do much better, or much worse, by flipping a coin.
Wow.
And, a number of things can be true. UCLA played their tail off in the tournament. UCLA was terrible in the few weeks leading up to the tournament. And in fact, were singularly responsible for launching Oregon State on its run by losing in overtime to Oregon State in, I guess that was the 4-5 game of the Pac-12 tournament. I have to go back and, that's what I remember. And, of course UCLA was incredibly unlikely to make that run. But you mentioned, VCU having been knocked out because of COVID. Well, this was the 10-year anniversary of the first four, right, and the 10-year anniversary of VCU going from that initial first four to the final, which is winning 5, at best, 50-50 games in a row, right? And, any of your viewers, if they want to take a quarter out of their pocket, okay, and flip it until they get 5 heads in a row, that's not easy to do. Like you could, I could start flipping now, and we'd probably get to the end of the show, and it wouldn't have happened.
So, how much is it science, and how much is it faith? The Sister Jean help Loyola, or the talent on the floor?
Well, I will say, the ACC Player of the Year and the best player on Georgia Tech did get a positive test right before that game against Loyola, and he was unable to compete. And, I don't, I got 16 years of Catholic school and nuns in my life. And I learned never to mess with the man upstairs in March.
Nice.
The basketball gods have a way of getting even. And if somebody, whether it's Sister Jean or Rabbi Sherman, has an in, I want a piece of that action.
Actually, I had Coach Matt Doherty on the show yesterday on Tuesday, and he talked about Notre Dame and having the priest on the bench. And I explained that my dad, who's a rabbi in Elkins Park, he's watching right now as well. He used to do the prayer before the Big East tournament when Coach Boeheim would go to Madison Square Garden. It was always fun to see how those prayers worked out. But really, I think it's a partnership.
Well, so this is an exclusive to Rabbi on the Sidelines, this story right here. I broadcast an NCAA tournament game for St. Joe's, my school, and my longtime employer for so many years. And we had a Jesuit on the bench. And he F-bombed the ref, got a technical foul. The referee turned and was about to tee up the priest in the collar.
Wow,
and he's like, it couldn't have been the priest, so he teed up the trainer.
Oh, my gosh.
And the coach looks down like to the end of the bench, and the trainer's like, I didn't say anything. And, the priest is looking a little sheepish. So I guess it can cut both ways. Thank God.
Was that Martelli?
It certainly was.
So he's on next week, actually. After Coach Boeheim next week, Martelli in 2 weeks. We'll have to see how the priest worked out.
See if he remembers the Father Mike technical foul.
Absolutely. So let's talk about the book Bracketology. If you haven't gotten your copy, definitely worth getting. Why did you decide to write this book, right? And first of all, let's start in the beginning. The story in here about how Bracketology basically came about in terms of you working with the newspaper and sending in all I forgot what it's called, but like, how did Bracketology become the thing that everybody knows by noon on Thursday of March Madness? You got to get those brackets in.
Yeah, well, I can't take any credit for that. In my world, we don't talk about gambling, because of course I'm a representative of an NCAA institution, and we're pure to the core. But certainly the notion of paying attention to the potential bracket before Thursday at noon is essentially where Bracketology made its mark, right? It took that. I mean, we used the word obsession on the cover of the book, and there are both positive and negative connotations to that word, to be sure. But it's a passion for that's really unrivaled. Like, I'm not saying, like, clearly there are more fans of the NFL. Or more people who buy tickets to Major League Baseball or NASCAR or whatever it is that generate the most eyeballs and revenue in the realm of professional sports. But there's something about college basketball and college football as well, but because there's so many more teams in college basketball, like almost 3 times as many as in high-level major college football, I would argue that it's the most inclusive major sport that we have, right? Sure. Like, I live in a pro town, you grew up, and now you live in another pro town. And, the coverage is, generally speaking, dominated by the pro teams,
right?
Except when one of the college teams gets on a run. And legitimately so. But, like, we don't represent the majority of the country.
Right.
Like, there are maybe 40 or 50 major cities that have franchises in one of the major professional sports. Well, every sliver of the country has a school.
Exactly.
And we're all from somewhere that has a school, or we all went to a school that's in the mix. And if we didn't, maybe our dad did, and we grew up a fan of that school, or crazy Uncle Bill, or the guy across the street who we talk smack to when the teams play, or the person in line in the morning to get your coffee, or whatever the case may be. There's a little bragging right, swagger thing going on with, the school on my chest is better than the school on your chest. And even if it isn't, I'm going to say it is, because.
Exactly.
And I think because of that, because it's not always the Yankees and the Patriots and the Lakers and whomever, right? Like, sure, a lot of times it's Duke and Kentucky. But a lot of times it's Loyola and George Mason and Butler and VCU and Oral Roberts.
And Abilene Christian, you can't forget them.
Whatever you want to say, right?
Yeah.
And it's just, I think it's inclusive in a way that brings people to it. And I tapped into the phenomena by kind of saying what that bracket was going to look like in advance, thinking that only the hardcore people in the sport would give a hoot about. I think that's maybe where we were wrong, because a lot more than the hardcore people in the sport give a hoot about it. And, you know, another inside scoop for you. What's today? The 15th as we record this. Well, on April 20th, next Tuesday, the first bracket for 2022 is going to go up. And
that was my question.
It's going to get incredible traffic. And
so how do you do that bracket with 2022 with 1,500 kids in a portal that you don't even know where they're going? Is that the hardest bracket you've ever done now?
Well, maybe if I turn the camera, you'll see the dartboard over my shoulder, because I'm going to be, or the professor at the top of the steps with a stack of term papers, right? Didn't they used to tell us we'll throw them down the steps, and if you land on the top step, you get an A, and if you land at the bottom, you know, I just think that in a way there's a, you know, I have to feed the beast. The college basketball public wants something to chew on. And I used to say to the powers that be at the network or at ESPN.com, specifically in this case, I'd say, you know, I'm just not comfortable doing it, you know, this early, especially this year, right? Because as you said, there's more player movement than we've ever seen. I mean, it's been trending in this direction, but now we've made kind of an exponential leap into nothing.
Some teams have 4 players left on their rosters. I've never seen anything like it.
Correct. And they're probably not going to be any of the 1 seeds next Tuesday.
Exactly.
But you know, ESPN, because they're in the eyeball business, whereas I'd like to think of myself more as in the accuracy business. Right? There has to be some, like if it were a Venn diagram, where do the rings overlap? And, you know, they finally said, you know, we appreciate your quest for accuracy, but our business model, you know, really would be enhanced if you would do this. And, oh, by the way, we'll give you year-round compensation. And I go, what a great idea. Why didn't I think of that? And then you know, I've had to change my business model, if you will, my practices, and develop an algorithm in which we factor in returning minutes, the relative offensive and defensive efficiency of those minutes, make an estimate on the value of the replacement minutes. I mean, if you sign the second-ranked player in the country to play those 30 minutes, or if you sign me, the value is going to be different, right? Plug that in and
see what happens.
See if UCLA ends up as the top overall seed next Tuesday. I can tell you that they're on the board.
Well, actually, it's funny that you say that, because I know they're projected number 2 in the country, so I ran out and got a couple tickets for my kids to get into Poly next year. We actually need you in the synagogue world for synagogue membership, right? It's membership renewal season for those people looking for synagogues out there right now, right? And it always predicts we need the Joe Lunardi synagogue membership algorithm to make sure that we can get our brackets right. We actually have a couple of.
I would be happy to rank and seed and bracket the temples as ever you wish. You know,
well, we're number 1. Sinai Temple.
At least number 1 in the West, Rabbi. At least.
Oh, that's true. Yeah, sometimes we get placed in a different region. We have a couple questions from the audience as well, but I want to ask one. And if you do have a question, please write in the chat, either on YouTube or Facebook, and we'll have the chance to Joe to get your question. I want to talk about one team that you wrote about in the book that really interests me in terms of faith, and that's BYU, Brigham Young University. How, in terms of their faith practices and their restrictions on not being able to play on Sundays, you actually have to change the brackets around. So that's number 1. Number 2, there is a Jewish school, Yeshiva University in New York, if you're familiar with them, Division
Mm-hmm.
III, the longest winning streak right now in the country in the NCAA. And if they were a Division I school and couldn't play on Saturdays, how would that all fit in? So let's talk BYU first.
Well, the BYU problem compared to Yeshiva is peanuts, really, because it can easily be worked around, right? And when I complain about having to work around BYU, it's mostly because they play late West Coast games. I have to stay up late, and then I have to move them. And then when I have to move them, I can only put them in certain places because of their restriction. So it makes me cranky. That doesn't mean it's wrong. Okay? My argument with BYU has always been that they are entitled to make whatever rule they wish in accordance with their beliefs and practices, and more power to them, right? Like if ESPN had a rule that, you know, they were no longer going to give airtime to short, big-nosed bracketologists, right? I would have to abide by that, and that is their right. Okay? My issue with BYU, and we talk about it in the book, is there have been instances, and we're able to document this in the chapter, of other teams being disadvantaged by the committee having to move or replace BYU on different seeds in different regions, or in some cases, different geographic placements altogether. Like there was a year that Providence had to go to San Jose from the East Coast to accommodate, you know, BYU not being able to fill a slot that might have resulted a 50-50 chance in them playing on a Sunday. And I guess my argument is, as I'm looking out for the whole field of 68 and not just BYU, and again, full disclosure, BYU is now a client of mine. I have a handful of schools that I work with on non-conference scheduling in the off season to help enhance their metrics. Like, I don't have anything against BYU. I just have something that I'm for the other 67, right? That they should have the greatest opportunity to be slotted wherever their record says they should be slotted. And my argument has always been, if anyone is to be disadvantaged by BYU's self-chosen practices, it should be BYU.
Interesting.
Right? And I would say the same thing about Yeshiva, and I would say the same thing about the Church of Bracketology if we had a team and we had a rule. Although, you know, I mean, let's be honest, there are about 300 Division I schools that play every Saturday, and it would be very difficult to field a nationally competitive Division I program that didn't play on that day of the week. Right? Because, I mean, what would you do in the NCAA? I mean, you could work, you know, what are you going to do? You're in your Elite Eight game. We're going to forfeit because if we win, the Final Four is on Saturday the following week. What do they do? What do they do in their postseason?
Right. So Yeshiva, they're able to accommodate in some way. They play before the Sabbath, before Shabbat. And actually, I had Tamir Goodman, known as the Jewish Jordan, on the show a couple of months ago. A good friend of mine in Israel. And as you probably are aware, he committed to Gary Williams, the University of Maryland. And when they said we can accommodate, he at that point said, I respect that, but I'm going to go with the faith aspect on there. Went to Towson accommodated it for 1 year until the coach was let go. And now he's in the business of faith and sports really coming together, which is it's a really interesting thing. Yeah.
No, and you know, again, I mean, Sandy Koufax wouldn't pitch a World Series game in late September. One of the first baseball biographies I ever read. So nothing but respect.
Right.
But the show must go on.
Yep. No, it's a really interesting tension and also the respect. Yep.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah.
We have a question from Isaac Greenberg in Arizona. Isaac's asking about the new head coach of Arizona. They didn't go in-house, but they went out of house to Tommy Lloyd, assistant of Gonzaga for the last 20 years, instead of choosing people like Stoudemire, Pastner, Miles Simons. What's your thought on the new Arizona choice?
Well, I'm not surprised that Arizona would want Tommy Lloyd as much as I'm surprised that Tommy Lloyd would want Arizona.
Interesting.
Right? I mean, on the list of coaches in waiting in Division I,
and there's a lot of them,
he would have to be at or near the top of that list. But what this tells me is, Mark Few made it clear, I'm not going anywhere. Right? And I don't have inside info on this particular topic, although I know Coach Few and I know Coach Lloyd. I haven't been in contact with them on it. And as well as Gonzaga funds its program, they're not going to match the salary of a head coach at a Power 5 school.
Right.
Right. So if Tommy has been turning down, the Eastern Washingtons of the world in recent years to kind of be the lady in waiting, well, okay, you can understand that because maybe the gap is like this. Well, now if the gap is like this, okay, this is as good an offer as you can get probably and still stay on the West Coast. I think he'll be extremely successful, and we'll see if kind of breaking away from the kind of bandit program that Arizona had become. And I'm not casting aspersions. It's on tape, okay? Maybe lightens whatever sanctions that could be coming down the pike from the NCAA.
Exactly. So I want to go to something personal that you wrote in the book, the lesson that you learned from your dad. It's a simple lesson, but I think it's an amazing, amazing lesson outside of bracketology. He simply said, don't take your life too seriously. Explain what that looks like in terms of bracketology and in terms of how you live your own life.
Well, I think what he was really saying, and of course, like any youth or most youth, I suppose, I appreciate it more now than I did then. That's one of the great mysteries of life, right? You finally learn things when maybe you don't need them anymore, but I need them as much. No, my dad basically said you can take your work seriously without taking yourself seriously. Nice. Or even and because look, like I'm working in the toy department of life.
I love that.
Right? Like I'm not saving lives or doing things that are changing people's personal or economic or societal welfare. Like I'm tracking basketball games and ranking 68 teams. And it's really fun. And a lot of people really pay attention to it. And it has little or no impact on anything important.
So I'm going to actually disagree. I'm going to disagree with you there because I think as both a rabbi, but also a gigantic sports fan, I just want to tell you as a rabbi's child who grew up in Syracuse, New York, there was nothing scheduled in my dad's synagogue if there was a game at the Carrier Dome because number one, we wanted to be there and we were. But number two, we understood actually the power of sports, the power of gathering, the power of, look, when Syracuse knocked out by Houston, I was done. Thankfully, I lived down the street from UCLA and I was back in, right? But I think the power of what you do actually gives a lot of people hope. When I saw Syracuse pop in the last four, wow, did that make my day and my week ahead? So I'm going to actually lift you up on a pedestal.
And I'm not like, look, I'm not trying to give you a bunch of false modesty. Right. And anyone who knows me, I think, knows I'm neither false nor modest. Okay. but you know, I used to I had a real job for 30 some years. Mm-hmm. And now I don't. Now I work in the toy department. And if it brings people joy and there's joy in gathering, absolutely. Do I think that a major college basketball event can, at the personal level, be like a religious experience? Absolutely. Mm-hmm. Like, I think walking down a pure fairway on the golf course on a beautiful morning is better than going to church. Like, I totally like for me, the Palestra is a cathedral. Like, yes. I get all that. But again, perspective and I'm not going to think of it at a level of gravitas that subscribes more to it. And I mean, there's plenty of commentators out there who are way too sanctimonious for the fact that they're working in sports. And if I ever get to be one of those guys, it'll be time to stop, because it's supposed to be fun.
Yep.
Right.
So you also have
we don't cry in our beer when we lose. Of course we do. And you know, I'm delighted that, you know, Syracuse got in and did well.
No, I'm just thinking of all the phone conversations that people have. You know, they see your first four, last four pop up. They're calling, we did it. It's like I did something, right? Watching on the TV, the work that you did.
Right. Well, here you go. I saw your T-shirt. So you're going to have Coach Boeheim on next week. So you can ask him this question for me. Okay? So he was quoted in the Syracuse paper when asked, you know, were you worried about your bid? He said, and by that point, I had them even above the first four.
Yep.
Right? And he said, no, I wasn't worried because Lunardi had us solidly in. And he wouldn't do that if we weren't, which on the surface sounds like he's throwing me a bouquet.
Right.
Except you know him and I know him. And that is Boeheim's way. And I would say this if he was in the box right next to me on this, I would say that's his way of giving me the finger for the times I didn't have them.
That's a nice way of putting it.
No, but it is. It is because, you know, there's a little snark there. And I get it because I've been wrong a lot about Syracuse. And I have to own that.
So,
when I grew up in basketball, Syracuse was great during the season and then choked in the tournament.
Right.
Now it seems to be the other way around.
Yeah, that's interesting.
And all of a sudden, you know, they're heroic. That's a new model for me.
So you talk a lot about major college programs. Those are, I would say, maybe a little easier, you know, the number ones, number twos, maybe number threes. But then there's all these small programs. And you write a beautiful line in your book. You said, there are two kinds of people in the world, drains and fountains. It's up to you. How do you become a fountain, both in bracketology, but I think outside of the brackets in life? How do you soak it up and not let it go down the drain?
Well, the line is not original to me. I think the first time I ever heard it was at a fundraising banquet, and the guest speaker was Rex Hudler, a baseball player who I think played some time for the Angels. Maybe he was an announcer for the Angels. I don't remember. But, you know, you can be a drain, you can be a fountain. It's really up to you. And I guess my position is there are plenty of unavoidable things in life that are draining, right? And okay, we can't avoid them. Rodney Dangerfield said, we take perfectly good care of ourselves, we'll get very sick and die. Like
Nice.
like that just is, right? But the rest of the time we kind of have a choice on what our outlook is going to be. And I would rather be positive. It just makes for a better day.
Mhm.
And more than that, look, we all know, like, let's say you go home tonight and you're told, we're going to go have dinner with the Joneses, or we're going to go have dinner with the Smiths, right? And every time you go to the Joneses, it's like, la, 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 woe is me. Let's sit around and talk about our ailments, right? And when you go to the Smiths, you sit outside, you have a good time, you dangle your feet in the pool, and it's, which one are you going to want to do more, right?
Absolutely.
It doesn't make you a better or a worse person. It's just human nature, I think, to gravitate toward the smile instead of the frown. And I do think that bracketology adds a lot of smiles.
Right. Absolutely.
Because even the people who disagree, right, are happy to be able to disagree.
Yes.
Right? We're doing something like we're not arguing about, the depreciation tax credit in the new Financial Act of Congress. We're talking about whether Syracuse should be a 7 or an 11, right? And that's water cooler talk. That's fun. That's like, who should play second base? It's like I said before, it's a game. It's supposed to be fun. And when I start smiling, it'll be time for somebody else to do it.
I love that. One shout out to Alan Fogel, good friend of mine and good friend of yours, who was able to bring you on today. If you have not gotten your copy, Bracketology, Joe Lunardi, College Basketball and the Creation of a National Obsession, definitely get this book out there, especially in light of April 20th as we get the Lunardi brackets for 2021 and
indeed.
2022. Last question to close the show this afternoon. What's the message that you want people to get out of this book? Why should we read it? Bracketology, the season's over. Why pick this book up right now?
Because I think they'll learn a lot without it being overbearing. Like I would like the takeaway to be, hey, you know what? I'd like to hang out with that guy. I'd like to have a beer with him and talk hoops. Or I'd like to have a beer with him and talk rack. And I would do that with anyone, as long as they're paying. So I'm good. I don't want it to be like, oh, this was heavy.
Right. Right.
And one of the reasons I've been approached many, many times before, and the timing wasn't right. We had the pandemic this time last year. We had a bit of time on our hands, et cetera. And I just felt that if I was ever going to do it, it was the right moment. And then thankfully we had a season, because if we didn't, we weren't going to put it out for another year.
Oh, that's interesting. Wow.
And then we decided, okay, let's move ahead, because, maybe my public of bracket heads, wants to read a book, and I hope they like it. I tried to make it be 250 pages of this.
Yeah, well, I couldn't put it down. I loved it. I continue to reference it to so many people. I look forward not just to the NCAA brackets, but also to our synagogue countrywide brackets. We're looking forward to that special algorithm as well. Next week on Rabbi on the Sidelines, Hall of Fame legend Coach Jim Boeheim of Syracuse. And right after that, Coach Phil Martelli, formerly of St. Joe's, an amazing, amazing man. Now associate head coach of Michigan, to Juwan Howard. But really also, and just maybe one last comment, these two coaches are involved in so much outside of the basketball world, especially on Coaches versus Cancer. Tell us a little bit about what you see outside of basketball from guys like Boeheim and Martelli that make a gigantic difference in this world.
Yeah. You know, the first time I met Coach Boeheim, it actually was a Coaches versus Cancer event.
Mm-hmm.
And I have, you know, during his 30 plus years in Philadelphia, accompanied Phil on more Coaches versus Cancer events than I can count, and have actually ended up occasionally filling in for him as the speaker at some Coaches versus Cancer events
Oh, wow.
in this region. And it is not a small token activity for either of those men.
Exactly.
Like, they have raised millions and millions of dollars. And I'm sure it's true with Coach Boeheim, but in Martelli's case, you know, I've been with him when he's taken a call from a stranger, you know,
Mm-hmm.
my brother has cancer, or my child was just diagnosed, or what have you. And he's done it for me. There's none of us that haven't been touched by what is such a horrible and random disease, myself included. And I mean, I've seen him leave practice to take a call or do a Coaches versus Cancer,
Amazing.
you know, thing. And you know, and I'm sure they're not the only two, but
No, right.
you know, they do. You can count how much money is raised in certain geographic areas, and Syracuse, the Syracuse area, was first nationally for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
And finally, Philadelphia with Martelli and Fran Dunphy, formerly at Temple, and you know, it's a bigger market, right?
Right.
It should raise a lot of money.
Absolutely.
And they've done just magnificent work. Plus, they hold a couple of golf tournaments, and that's kind of my addiction in the off season. And if there's golf involved, I'm generally going to show up.
Well, then we hope to see you out here in LA during the winter months, because golf is always involved here on the West Coast in Los Angeles.
Oh, don't torture me. I'll be in bucolic Bristol, Connecticut, where, you know, sometimes the sun doesn't shine from the opening tip of the season until the last game in April.
Well, we hope that in your travels this coming year, if you're at the Galen Center for the Trojans or at Pauley, you stop down the road here at Sinai Temple, and we get to see you in person as well. Joe, it's a pleasure to have you. Joe Lunardi, Bracketology. Get your copy. Rabbi on the Sideline.